Tonight we have the distinct pleasure of hearing from Dr. Sara Goldrick-Rab. We all know, I think, from our personal experience working in higher education, we know and have known homeless students, students struggling with food insecurity and housing insecurity. We can name them. But it's rare that you have a professional in the field of research and academia that has both a personal and professional passion for our most marginalized students. And when I was at the U.S. Department of Education, I kept hearing this name, Dr. Sara Goldrick-Rab, and her papers were being distributed, talking about the importance of free and universal community college, the need for housing, for assistance for our students, food insecurity, things that I think we all intuitively knew were barriers for our students. But until we had a number, until we had a study or a landmark evaluation of the scope of the issue, it didn't get the same policy attention as it is getting now. And so I'm very grateful personally and professionally for the work she has done, as I know all of you are. But it's particularly important for those of us here in the Portland region. We know that our students do struggle with housing and food insecurity. We know that the fastest growing income brackets in the Portland area are over 200,000 and under 10,000 a year. And so right smack in the middle are the community colleges, creating that pathway to opportunity for our lowest income students. And if we have the right policy context as well as the work on the ground to help our students, we'll be able to help more of our students move into the middle class. So I want to actually introduce someone who's going to introduce Sara. And this is another person that I heard about when I was in Washington, D.C. And Senator Mark Haas, Mark's name came up quite often, again, in working with the White House and in working at the Department of Education relative to the Oregon Promise and the work that he was doing here in Oregon to make college affordable, community college affordable for students. And so we had a chance to talk a little bit before the presentation, and I learned quite a bit more, and really appreciate the work that he has done here in Oregon, assisting, again, our most marginalized students to access higher ed. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Senator Mark Haas.
Well, I cannot imagine a more appropriate and exciting speaker for the people in this room, in this place, at this time, in our slice of the universe. Dr. Sara Goldrick-Rab is one of the most prominent national voices of college access and affordability. She spent years researching the costs and the benefits of getting people into and out of college. She's documented many of the painful truths that a lot of people don't want to hear. She's written articles and books, and most of you know she's written a new book called Paying the Price. A few weeks ago, she appeared on The Daily Show to discuss that book and the quest to get our sons and daughters into college. She told me going on that show was like jumping out of an airplane, but she was fabulous. Professor Goldrick-Rab founded the Wisconsin Hope Lab, the nation's first research laboratory aimed at making college affordable. She's been an influential voice in state and national higher education policy for many years and is currently a professor at Temple University. But enough about her, let's talk about me. 4 or 5 years ago, I was stumbling around with this idea of making community college free, providing opportunities. I was reading everything I could, and I kept seeing this name, Sara Goldrick-Rab. I found a phone number in Wisconsin and was surprised that she answered the phone. And when she answered it, I knew right then and there that we would hit it off because she had one of those familiar hellos like my relatives in the Midwest in Pennsylvania where they add an N before the hello, so it's yellow, hello. I was a little nervous about asking her if she could help Oregon, and if she didn't have the time, it's okay, and I understand, and maybe someday she could make her way out to the Oregon legislature. But before I was done with that rambling question, she said, well, I'll be in Portland tomorrow night. Let's have dinner. We became fast friends, and she has become a trusted advisor to our state. She's met with business people here, with legislators, and even had lunch with the governor, all to talk about community college for tuition-free for Oregon. She's appeared before legislative hearings, and she came across not as an outspoken activist, but as a common-sense voice for getting poor and middle-class kids into college without plunging them into debt. And in the last few weeks, as the Oregon Promise has rolled out, I've met with hundreds of the more than 10,000 kids who have arrived on community college campuses all over our state. They want to be dental hygienists, they want to be diesel mechanics, paramedics, some even want to be doctors, and they want to start this way. Sara Goldrick-Rab played a big role in changing their lives. And I personally want to extend my gratitude for her incredible help. And I hope you will all help me welcome Dr. Sara Goldrick-Rab.
Yeah, I'm all verklempt. This is good. I don't think I answer the phone that way, but anyway, it's really embarrassing. This is like a massive honor. I mean, I opened my book tour in Milwaukee, and I opened my book tour in front of the very people that I studied over 6 or 8 years, and that was hard. This is really wonderful. I am so grateful to those of you who made this possible. Portland Community College, places like this are exactly why I went into this job. It's why I chose this career. I was a grad student who needed funding, like so many graduate students do. And my professor at the time said, oh, I'm out of funding on that other project. I got this new thing. Have you ever been to a community college? Well, I was at the University of Pennsylvania. I was in the Ivy League. And no, I've never been to one. And he said, well, you're going to go. And he sent me off on a trip that involved going to 8 community colleges in about 2 weeks to find out what this federal government and this policy had done when it decided that women from poor backgrounds who had children, instead of giving them cash assistance so they could help their kids, would in fact send them right to work and would tell them that education was not something they should spend their time on. This thing is called welfare reform. And I was sent out, having never been to a community college, to go figure out what was happening, and I set foot on, and by the end of the first day, having talked to people who understood how complicated it was to be this country, to have these ambitions of using education as a way to a better life, while wanting to include everybody in it, and trying to make that affordable, that all of those ambitions in this country were hitting home in one place, and it was at the community college. The real story of education in this country is not happening at Harvard University or Stanford University, or even, with all due respect, at Reed. The real story is happening at the nation's community colleges. And y'all are really complicated institutions. Really complicated, okay? And having the opportunity to not only read books about schools like this and students like these and administrators like these, but also to get to meet so many. I mean, I think this might be my 70th or so campus on the country that I've been to, and to get the opportunity to try to serve through helping policymakers do incredibly difficult things is an enormous honor. So I just want to start with that as I talk about things that, frankly, I have a feeling you already know. And I want to admit that to you. I'm going to talk about paying the price. I can see students in this room who are probably already paying the price and know quite well what it took me years to figure out. So I'm not trying tonight to tell you about your life. I am trying to talk with you in the way that I try now to go to Washington and talk with them and talk with the public about the stuff they don't know about and the truths that have got to be told so that we can do better than this. Because where we're at right now, this is a pretty amazing school, but what's happening to this school and what's happening to the students in this school and what's going to happen to them if we don't do better than this, that is not okay. And that's the activist part of me. I don't have all of the answers. I can just tell you when I see something that is not okay. Okay, so I begin everything in all of my studies and all of my research and all of my talks. I begin with students. Students are what we're supposed to be focused on in education, and oftentimes, frankly, we're not. We're focused on other things. We need to start with the students because they always know the truth, and they always have the story that will open our eyes. So let me start with one. I met her personally. I had a wonderful team of researchers on this study. If you look at this study and you think I did this by myself, you're crazy. Okay? There were 200 researchers who worked with me on this study over 6 years. And so some of them did some of the interviews I'm going to describe to you. But Chloe Johnson, I met in person for the first time in the fall of 2008. And she was sitting in a community college cafeteria in Wisconsin. And she was looking at me because I had asked her to come meet me for an interview, and she wasn't sure who I was. And I understood, you know. But I had really just a straightforward question for her. It wasn't a big, scientific, complicated question. I wanted to know, Chloe, how'd you get here? How did you arrive sitting there, 18 years old, in this community college cafeteria? How did this happen for you? And she told me a story that I think is a very common American story, right? She knew when she was growing up that what you do next in your life is get out of high school and you go to college. That's what you do. And that's what she did, and that's how she put it. And she didn't grow up in a family, though, where people had gone to college before. But she's growing up at a time in the mid-2000s when that message was coming out loud and clear in high schools. And she could also read the economy. And as she put it, you can't get a decent job without an education. She even went so far as to distinguish between what was a decent and not so decent job. She was already working at fast food joints and places like that, and that to her needed to be a temporary part of her life. It wasn't what she wanted for herself over the long term, and so she was here to do better. She said, actually, she wanted to be clear, that was fine for other people, it just wasn't going to work for her. I thought that was kind of her to acknowledge that some folks, that is what's out there, and she was trying to distinguish herself. A couple weeks later, I went back to the same school and I met Nima. Nima expressed her desires in another way. And there's another guy in the book, Ian, he's talked about it in almost the same fashion. He said that the reason he was in college was not so much about him and his desire to merely get a good job to support his life, but Nima and Ian said that the reason they wanted to go to college was to make a better life for their families. They are not 25-year-olds or 30-year-olds with children of their own. They were 18-year-olds, and they weren't talking about future families that they would have sometime later in their lives. They were talking about the people who raised them. Nima wanted to be able to pay the bills for the people who had raised her and had made it possible for her to come to this country and to have a better life and to live with a roof over her head. And the people who got her to college, she wanted to repay them. You'll see later why that's so important that we take that seriously and we recognize that that family is providing a major motivation. Now, both of these folks, and indeed all of these people that I spent all of this time with, are what we would call from low-income families. To put a number on it, the average family income of the individuals in this study came from families earning $29,000 a year. That's what we're calling low income here. And nationwide, there are lots of them. And lots of them, like these folks, not only hope to go to college, they expect to go to college. That number, 74%, that's a public policy triumph. Those numbers didn't look like that 20 and 30 years ago, even 40 years ago. They look quite different. That's partly because we have offered financial aid for college, that those expectations of going to college have gone up. But only 51% of those who graduated from high school, and we all know that not all of them will even do that, only half of them will go on to college of any kind. I am not focused on bachelor's degrees. They're very nice, but they are not the only credential of value. And so when I talk to you about completing college tonight, I am talking about completing a certificate or an associate degree or what have you. finishing anything that you came to get done. The biggest problem that I've been focused on, though, is not the small number of people who actually get on to college, who wanted to go, but the small number who finish of those who start. Okay? And the fact that only 40% of students from low-income families who do all of those things and actually get to college get anything over the next 6 years, that's a tragedy. And it's more of a tragedy today than it was 20 or 30 years ago. Because once upon a time, if you started college and it didn't work out for you, yeah, you said, I tried. I thought it was for me. It doesn't work out. I don't like the classes. I'm out of here. Today, when you say that and you leave, you walk out with debt. You may not have a degree in your hand of any kind, but you've got debt. I can almost guarantee it. And so that makes that a very, very different world. Okay, so I got to know these folks, Chloe and Nima and almost 3,000 other people like them, in an effort in a study that was asking this question. If they're from low-income families and they need money, by definition, how much does that need for money matter? And does financial aid, which is our main mechanism for making college affordable in this country, how much does that actually do its job? Right? We've actually had the same public policy strategy in this country for 50 years. In order to keep family income from preventing you from getting a college degree, we'll figure out who needs the money, and then we'll give you financial aid, and it will make college affordable. That's the whole theory. And there's a huge program, hundreds of billions of dollars, right, set up around that basic approach. And I had the opportunity to take a look in Wisconsin at students at 42 public colleges and universities, including all of the state's community and technical colleges, in order to try to figure this puzzle out. Now, in order to figure it out, I did something a little bit unusual. I gotta tell you, and this is not a slam on my colleagues in the field, but for the most part, when they look at undergraduates, they look at them like they're numbers. They pull your college transcripts, or even worse, they pull just something called your National Student Clearinghouse records, and you become little tiny digits. And they just simply look to see whether you were in college and whether or not you finished college. And maybe they look at your debt number. And then they draw conclusions about you, about your lives, about whether you work hard, about whether you deserve to be in college. And they have very little information on which to go. There was another major book published in the last several years that captured the nation's attention. It's actually the top-selling book in higher education since the year 2000. Does anybody know what it is? Does anybody remember? Big book, New York Times, cartoons, passed all around the Department of Education. It's called Academically Adrift. And it's the story, apparently, about today's students and how you don't care very much about college because you're academically adrift, you're too busy partying, and that the real problem is your faculty aren't pushing you hard enough. And if we did, you would finish. Okay, this study was based on 24 mostly private institutions, and yet an op-ed ran at the New York Times that questioned the investment made in federal financial aid because so many of the financial aid recipients, they said, were academically adrift. They didn't actually have the data to know that a single person in their entire study was receiving federal financial aid. So this is how it normally goes, and I lay that out for you on purpose, because this is how bad policy gets made. So I was pretty concerned that the story that I understand over time, as I spent 6 years trying to study students, was a little more accurate than that. So we decided to not only collect records and look at financial aid and all that kind of good stuff, but also to survey students. Now, I know that's a drag, by the way. I've taken surveys, okay? So I also designed fun surveys, interesting surveys, surveys that ask questions that we found out that students were delighted to answer because as they wrote in the margins of the surveys, nobody ever thought to ask me that. I've never been asked. I've always wanted to talk to somebody about that. I also made sure, by the way, that we included $25. So 75% of the students in this study answered their surveys. And I'm incredibly grateful to them because it allowed us to learn things about how their lives were actually going that enabled us to test things like, oh, you're spending all your time partying, huh? Well, they told us what they were doing with their time. And that is not what they were doing with their time. The other thing is, 50 of the students, actually 1,000, so let me back up, 1,000 of those 3,000 students said they would give us their time to sit down with us in person every 6 months to do interviews. We couldn't afford to talk to all 1,000 of them, so we drew a group of them, and we sat down to meet with 50 of them around the state of Wisconsin every 6 months. And we didn't give up on them when they didn't stay in school. So Chloe Johnson, I met for the first time in the state of Wisconsin. I met her the second time in Tampa, Florida, where I had followed her, not in a creepy way, right? I got that from Trevor Noah. I got to just tell you, I stole his joke. I was not stalking Chloe. I went down there, I literally got on a plane and went down there to meet with her because I was so excited to hear from her why she was no longer in Wisconsin, why she had left school. And I learned so much from not assuming why she had left school and sitting down and asking her that question. It really did change the nature of my work. So all of these people in this study did something extraordinary. They filled out the FAFSA. Has anybody filled out the FAFSA? No offense to my colleagues at the Department of Education, but this is a small American bureaucratic tragedy all its own. This thing is a disaster. And it's rightly getting a lot of attention about simplifying it, maybe getting it down to 2 or 3 questions. That's great. But I gotta tell you, every last one of the people in my book did it already. So all the trouble that I observed, all of the problems that I'm gonna describe next, they happen after FAFSA. I love Michelle Obama, but I'm a little bit worried about the message that's been sent lately. I love Michelle Obama, okay? This is not a critique. We gotta worry about a message that says all you gotta do is fill out the FAFSA. It'll only take 20 minutes, and then you'll be okay. Every problem I'm gonna describe happens after the FAFSA. Okay, so this is precisely, and I wanna say this, these are the kinds of people the system's supposed to serve. There's a ton of other people who the system doesn't serve. Okay? The system decides through doing the FAFSA that there's all these other people who do not need financial aid. Their families are fine. You can make it without the Pell Grant. I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand if you're in one of those families that can't make it without the Pell Grant but is deemed not needy by this system. A lot of those students who I've met in subsequent work say to me all the time, we need it too. They're getting all the money and they're taken care of, but we need it too. All we're getting is loans. One of the things that I was looking at then was, are the ones who are getting it okay? If all these other people are not all right, is at least somebody all right? Right? These are the students who get the grant aid, so they're the ones who are supposed to be okay. So as a starting point for why they're not all right, the promise that is being made, the promise made by grants, and the most prominent one of which is called the Pell Grant, okay, it is delivered in the following way. The college, or more importantly, the state, sets the price of college, and then you get this discount, the Pell Grant, and it's got a dollar amount attached to it. And you're supposed to take it and apply it, and then you're fine. And when this program was created, it was supposed to cover 100% of the cost of attending college at a public 2-year or 4-year. That's a powerful promise made by a coupon. Has anybody ever used a Groupon? I love them. I like to sit there on the airplane and scroll through them and look for my favorite restaurant in town and say, you know, I can never really afford to go there, but if I find a Groupon, I'll go there. All right, so here's what the Pell Grant does to students across the country. It says, yeah, cool, I found it, the restaurant, the college that I really want to go to. There's that Groupon. It's going to give me, let's say, 75% off. So you go to that favorite restaurant that you're so excited to try. It's not your favorite yet, but you know, you've heard it's really good. And you sit down with the menu, and you pick what you want to eat for dinner. And the waiter brings it, and you start eating, and you're like, yeah, this is great. I'm so glad I did this. This is what I always thought it would be like. People told me what it was like to eat here. I've been waiting my whole life to eat this, whatever. And then the waiter comes by, and he says, oh yeah, you're going to use that Groupon, right? By the way, we made a mistake. The print's wrong. It's only 25% off, not 75% off. So your bill's going to be a whole lot higher than you expected. What are you going to do? You're going to try to get them to let you wash dishes? They don't need a dishwasher. They got one. You're going to dine and dash? You can't give the food back. You ate it. It's non-returnable. This is what's happening to students all the time who get the Pell Grant and come to college and find out it does not cover what they thought it would. Same thing happens to state grants, like the Oregon Opportunity Grant as well. So let me show you this just with a few numbers. Okay, the first one's really important. I want you to look at the orange line. The orange line shows you that over time, lots more people have been getting the Pell Grant. And that's a good thing. And there's a reason, by the way, that it spikes up there around 2008, 2009. That's because the economy tanked and more people became eligible for the Pell Grant. And also, President Obama expanded the criteria so that more people could become eligible for the Pell Grant. And in return, Congress did what it must. This program's called an entitlement, which means if you qualify and you do the FAFSA, you get it. So the blue number is what the people in Washington were freaking out about, which is how much that program ended up costing because more people needed it. The more people who needed it, the more it cost, the more people started to attack the program. Something's wrong with these people. Why are they going to college? Maybe they don't complete college, right? Maybe they're academically adrift. The rhetoric is heated up and up and up. And in the meantime, for the individual students, the average Pell Grant, which is the gray line, and the green line, the maximum Pell Grant, has hardly changed. That would be okay if the price of going to college had stayed the same over all that time. Except it didn't. The cost of living in this country, by the way, went up, and so did the cost of college. So what we fancy folks call the purchasing power, or the value of that coupon, dropped. And it's been dropping for decades. There have been a few exceptions where we've managed to restore some of the value, but only really for the community colleges, which is good, and it is the place we should put the priority. But what you see there is a steady erosion of what this thing buys. And the more people who've needed it, basically the less it's covered. And that's the Pell Grant where, like I said, everybody who qualifies will get it. The government has made a commitment to pay for it. In states, including this one, when more people need it, it isn't necessarily funded to cover all those people. The year I got to Wisconsin, the state grant, which so many of our students counted on, it ran out in September, which means school started in September and it ran out in September. Okay, so that makes some sense. The next year, it ran out in March for the following September, which means that if you hadn't already applied to get it, you were out of luck. And this continues to happen. I'm very worried that this year, when the FAFSA, you can fill it out earlier right now. You should have filled it out by now. By the way, students, please fill out the FAFSA. But even though you can fill it out earlier, it doesn't necessarily mean that the states have any more money for you. Okay, so let's talk about what this actually looks like for real people and their wallets. Chloe's mother, single mom, recently divorced when I met Chloe. She made just over $25,000 a year. Okay, so what Chloe got from the FAFSA was a little present to her called an expected family contribution. Don't mean to sound so sarcastic, but really, this is the expected family contribution. We don't even call it the estimated family contribution. This means your family is expected to put up this money. And you can see that number is actually fairly substantial, right? She was told that her mom needed to put in $2,500, and like so many moms out there who have debt, which isn't recorded on the FAFSA, she couldn't pay it. So that was the first thing that Chloe figured out. The price of a year of community college in 2008 in Wisconsin was over $15,000 a year. You all know that that's not predominantly tuition, and so I'm showing you it is not mainly tuition. It is the cost of living, not in Philadelphia and not in Portland, in Wisconsin. Okay. So she gets the Pell Grant. She gets a partial Pell Grant. And that's it, because the state of Wisconsin had ran out of their grant aid by the time she applied to college. So she got about $2,500 to help her out, which barely covers the expected family contribution that she already cannot cover. So she is short, a girl from a family making less than about $25,000 a year, she is short over $12,000 a year. We've decided as the federal government that she can only afford $2,500, and we left her with a bill of about $12,000. And that's a good scenario. What is she supposed to do? Okay, so this Pell Grant recipient, who by definition was never supposed to have to take loans because we were supposed to make things okay for them at the very least, she's got to take on loans. But she doesn't want to because her mom has terrible debt. So she tries to avoid it for a period of time. But it's pretty clear from those numbers that it's not going to end up making sense for her. This young woman who went to college to become a veterinarian because she grew up around animals and raised a horse her whole life, sold her horse that fall to go to college. It raised half of what her mom was expected to contribute for that expected family contribution. And the irony is, if she had just known better and gone to college the year she was born, she would have been okay. Things have changed really rapidly over time, over her lifetime. Of course, she didn't know that. And I wish that she was an outlier. I wish she was an anomaly, but she's not. Her price is incredibly close to the national average. And yet, folks like Lamar Alexander and others continue to tell us that community college is already free. It's really far from the case. So how did students like Chloe cope? Well, like she eventually did, they took loans. Now, I gotta tell you, the students at the two-year colleges in Wisconsin tried really hard in that first year of college not to take loans. They really didn't want to. There's good reason to be worried about it. Many of them had parents with debt. Many of them weren't sure they would last through the year. So it wasn't that surprising that the four-year college students took loans. It is stunning, though, to see 77% of Pell Grant recipients, the lowest income folks at the universities, nonetheless having to take those loans. Well, they always tell us that, you can work your way through college. We all did it. And then we turn and look at the work-study program. The work-study program is supposed to be a pretty good deal. You get to work on campus. You get to work maybe at the library. You can do your homework while you're doing that. You don't have to commute very far. Very few of these students, as you can see, had any work-study support. Chloe wasn't offered $1. Now, why is that? It's because this enormously popular program is incredibly underfunded. So in 2012, which is the most recent year for which we have data, only 1 in 10 Pell Grant recipients of public colleges and universities got any funding from the work-study program. And what they typically got was less than $2,000. So this is a myth, the idea that people can just go get work-study. The money is basically not out there. But what they were doing was working. And that's Chloe's story. Chloe said, okay, I sold the horse. I'm going to cut my living costs down by moving in with that guy that I've been dating for a couple weeks. That did not go well. Okay? Lots of women finding themselves doing that. She moved in. She lived far away from school because it was cheaper the further out that she lived. And she took on 2 jobs. One at Kohl's, which is a department store, and one at PetSmart, which she thought made sense considering she was trying to become a veterinarian. And she began to do what so many college students do. Get up in the morning, drive to the first job, leave the job, go to class, leave that, go back to the second job, leave that, go back to class, come home at night, midnight by the time she gets home, usually not having eaten anything, waking up at 6:30 in the morning, grabbing a pot of coffee, chugging it down, and going back to do it again. And so as she told me, it wasn't long before she started doing the head bob in class. She's drooling on her desk. This is not surprising that Chloe finds herself getting bad grades. Okay? She wasn't able to study. She wasn't able to do much, frankly, than commute around Wisconsin's roads trying to make ends meet. She did decide halfway through the semester that she couldn't live without one of those loans, so she took a loan. She filed for a loan, in other words. But a loan that she filed for in October didn't arrive until the end of December. Because while the federal financial aid system is generous in some ways, it is definitely not fast. Now, Chloe was actually kind of lucky. She found 2 jobs. There were other people out there. These statistics would make some people say, why aren't all of them working if they're having such trouble? Okay? And I can disaggregate the data, by the way, to show you the working rate in Milwaukee, right? Our predominantly, incredibly hyper-segregated city, and the numbers of people working look, quote, low. Only about 55% of the students in Milwaukee were working. And I've shown those numbers to folks, and they said, oh, you know, that's the problem. Those people don't understand they need to work. You know what? The data actually leads them to say that. Because all we ask undergrads is, are you working or not? And if you're not working, we assume it's because you don't want to work. But regular people get surveyed by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and the Bureau of Labor Statistics understands regular people, and it says if you're not working, it says, have you been seeking work? You trying to find a job? And the reason is because it is so hard to be seeking a job and being unable to find one. And yet we found, and this applies to Milwaukee as well, that the real story is if you're not working, then you're spending a lot of time and a lot of heartache trying to find a job. And we have all these problems out there that are all over the media, right? Problems like employers aren't providing regular hours on a week-to-week basis. They're putting people on shifts and not telling them until like the night before what time you got to be in. Well, you got class the next day. It's not surprising, then, that students are running up against these problems. We just haven't connected those dots. And Chloe, like so many other people, found it very hard to find help. Her mom, frankly, did not have anything to give her. Okay, the guy that she moved in with quickly did not have any kind of help that he could offer her. And Chloe pretty quickly found that she simply could not afford to eat every day. I watched it happen. I watched this young woman get skinny. I watched her hair get stringy. She looked so stressed out. This was not just a matter of not having enough time to find food. And I know that because when we started to see this happen among students in the study, we started administering something called the USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture Measure of Food Insecurity, something that hardly anybody had done with undergrads. And that thing helps us figure out the difference between you eat ramen every day because, frankly, you know, you save some money and ramen's pretty good if you mix it up with some, you know, anyway, I like jalapenos in it. All right? So, you know, you can do things to distinguish between people who are making some food choices and maybe don't have enough time and people like Chloe who simply couldn't eat every day. And we started to find out this was really happening. We found people having trouble paying their bills. That is not news. What really stunned us was when we went beyond this study and started going out there, as Mark referred to, and going out there at community colleges around the country and surveying people and finding out that homelessness is no longer an individual personal problem of 1 or 2 folks. The most recent survey that we did revealed that 13% of community college students are homeless. Okay, these numbers, I think, are underestimates because we all know that homeless students are not exactly volunteering to take our online surveys, which, by the way, have no money attached to them. And if that's an undercount, that's pretty darn scary. And then there's one other thing. These students, while they're falling short, while they're not getting their course materials or their books, but also really importantly not getting their food, they are actually trying to spread the resources out even more thinly by sharing money with their families. And so there's a reason I told you about Nima and why Nima went to college. She went to college to cover her parents' bills. And she wasn't going to wait to do that until she graduated. Same thing happened to Ian, and he walked us through what it felt like to be a 19-year-old man who was so grateful to his mom for getting him to college. He said, she raised me up, she raised me right, she got me out of trouble on the street. I'm the first in my family to go to college. She did that for me, it's time to do for her. He never had enough money for himself, and he regularly passed it along to his mom. He would even watch for her to have needs so that she wouldn't have to ask him. If he reported that to his financial aid officer, he could be at risk of being charged with using the money wrong. Those things he's doing, that's called non-educational expenses. That's so many kinds of wrong. Because I'll tell you what, if his mom wasn't getting that money, she probably wouldn't have supported him staying in school. She would have needed him to leave to take on more work. In many ways, families like those used to be supported by systems like welfare, cash assistance. We cut those programs. We made it hard to get food stamps. And we passed the savings on and created student loan debt. That's where those savings are now. They're in the student loan budget. So like I said, there was a safety net when these students were born. It was possible to go and get food stamps. Now we have all kinds of rules. If you want food stamps and you don't have kids and you need help, then you need to work 20 hours a week. Even if you're in college, and we all know perfectly well that working 20 hours a week does not exactly help you get through school. Okay, so we followed these folks over 6 years. Took a lot of patience. It was also really, really hard to watch because it became pretty clear that people were not making it. And like those national statistics, some of our folks fared a little bit better. They were all from low-income families, and 50% of them made it. Those who started at community colleges, it was 42%. And 2 in 5 of them walked away, as we had feared, with nothing in their hands except their debt, a lot of which would look small to my neighbors and friends. It isn't 6 figures. It's not $100,000 of debt. It's not something that a change in the interest rate's really going to help. It's like $4,000 of debt. It's like that first subsidized loan they took, the $3,500. They took that during their first year of college, but they never got anything in exchange for it. And so they have trouble repaying. Now, we got in the midst of all of this following students around thing, we also got to try something. We got to actually take $5 million. This was a very strange experience. I don't usually get $5 million from philanthropists, but $5 million was made available to distribute to some of these students to see if giving that money to some of these students would push them faster and harder and enable them to finish college. Okay? And so we were able to look to divide this group up at a group that got offered another $3,500 a year for college if they were at a 4-year school, and another $1,800 a year for college if they were at a community college. As usual, by the way, the community college students are offered less money even though they often have more financial need. Okay? We watched over the years, and we did find some evidence that giving students more money for college helps them finish. But I want to clarify, only by giving more money through the aid system were we able to measure this. Okay? So I couldn't actually walk up to you and say, here's the $3,500 and let's see how you do. I could only get you the money through the aid system, which I have decided is no way to give out money at all. Okay? Only with all the rules and regulations and the satisfactory academic progress and the refiling of the FAFSA every year, that's the only way this thing was given out. And we found that most often, people didn't even get $3,500 that they were expecting. It went through the aid system and it came out a whole other thing, and usually a lot less money. So it boosted the rates of people at 4-year colleges finishing degrees over 4 years from 16% to 21%. Okay? That 5 percentage points, that's pretty big, except we're still at 21%. And when I presented this stuff to the wonks, they said, well, as I told you, Sarah, what's hanging people up is not a lack of money. They don't know how to do college. Or they're academically adrift. They don't really want it. But I'll tell you what, that's not what it is. There was a clear need for money. We just were not delivering it. So I'm calling this whole new thing the new economics of college. The new economics of college is there's a price for college, and we're basically not helping. We're just telling ourselves that we are. We pay for the federal Pell Grant, and as taxpayers, by the way, you pay a whole lot for it. And then we tell ourselves that at least somebody out there must be all right. We can do better than this. We've been doing this system, the thing I just described, we've been doing it this way for 50 years. We've been doing it this way since the average college student looked a whole lot different, had a lot less financial need, and there were a lot fewer colleges out there. There weren't even hardly any community colleges back then. But we still have the same darn system. So I'm going to suggest just 3 basic strategies. I'm happy to talk during Q&A about more wonky specific type things. Okay, the first one is to educate other people. There's so much push out there right now to get students college ready and to tell other people, you should go to college, all that's good. But it is only fair to match that with pricing that makes sense for them. And we need to do a lot more educating of each other and of our neighbors about the reality of what today's college student is going through so they can catch up and figure out what's really going on. That's why The Daily Show was important. I had one mission, and I got to tell you, it was so scary. I just wanted to look Trevor Noah in the eyes and tell him that there were homeless college students out there. I also told that to Glamour, by the way. And the news editor said, no. Wait, they're in college? No. They're homeless? How could the two at the same time? Yes. Okay, we got to stop featuring Ivy League, residence hall, fun trips after school and spring breaks, etc., as the image of undergraduate life. That is not the image of undergraduate life. And you got to tell people that this is happening and not hide it anymore so that they can catch up. And then you have to advocate. And there are so many things you can advocate for. My book has tons of suggestions. How about, if you don't want to get too complicated, how about just change the expected family contribution to the estimated family contribution and stop insulting so many families? Okay? Let's just do that. Or if you want to get real fancy, how about we change the formula for the work-study program so that it doesn't give more money to colleges that are just older, which is what it does right now, rather than to colleges that have more students who have financial need. Okay? The formula for distributing the work-study program has not been revised since 1983. We need to do that. We could, I don't know, we could change the SNAP requirements so that if you need food stamps, maybe you could get them without having to work 20 hours a week. That would be maybe a little bit of a lift. Maybe we could do my favorite one. How about when young people go through school and we give them milk in the morning and a free lunch at noon, and they manage to get through all that and graduate from high school and show up at their community college like they were told to do, how about we give them lunch? I literally do not understand why we are not doing that, and I'm actually starting to find some bipartisan support around this idea. This seems to just make sense, and it is so confusing to the students. This young man in New York City said to me, let me get this straight. I did what you told me to do. And he's blaming it on me. I get it. You know, and you took away my Metro card, which in New York City is a really big deal, and you took away my lunch, and then you're wondering why I can't get through the day? Okay, this is pretty straightforward, and I'm not even talking about improving the food quality of these programs, which also have their own issues. We could speed up the process a little bit for giving out money. Students who need to pay their rent cannot wait a month and a half. It's just a fact. We wonder why the students are gone by the second, third, or fourth week. They were there on the first day, and the money wasn't there, and that's just a problem. That's a mismatch. And this is not aimed at the students, okay? This recommendation, I am not asking you to donate, but I do want to say this. For those of us that are working on bigger solutions out there, right now, students are going hungry. And I, for one, can't wait anymore. And by the time I got to finish this book, I kept looking at myself in the mirror going, what have you actually gotten done lately? So my colleagues and I, a bunch of really strong women, decided that we would form something called the FAST Fund. And I went to my savings account and I made a big old withdrawal and I stuck it in there. And here's what we're doing. This is emergency money. Okay, money for emergencies. Now, anytime anybody sets up an emergency fund, they immediately start saying things like, are we going to give it to people who deserve it? Are they going to use it the right way? Are they going to finish college? Look, I don't care. You said you needed it. And when I needed something, I got to call my grandfather and he gave it to me. And that's what our students need. Now, the problem is they tend to need it the most at places where the faculty are already really underpaid and find themselves dipping in their pockets to give this money out themselves. What we ended up doing, instead of trying to sort out the students, was just to give the money to the teachers. And so what we've done is we've picked 3 colleges. We're going to pick 3 colleges a year, and we picked 3 teachers. And we're writing the checks to the teachers, and the teachers are giving it out as they see fit. So this money is fast because the teacher sees you right in the classroom and knows you need it and gets you the money. And it's also fast because it's faculty and students together. One of the things that I hope that it does is help more students know that the faculty do care. They do see you. They do know it's happening. They don't know necessarily what to do about it. That I'd like to see more programs like these spring up, at least as Band-Aids, while we wait for the bleeding to stop. So I'm going to stop there, and thank you so much for your time and for everything that people like you have taught me, and take questions. So I think there's a microphone over here that they want you to use for questions. If you have questions or comments, I'm happy to take your comments too. Just come on up.
I'm a student here, and I'm just curious how the teachers identify the students who need the help in the emergency fund.
With the FAST Fund?
Yes, with the FAST
Yeah.
fund.
So 2 different ways, and we're actually just doing this. The way that we pick the teachers was we pick people who we've been able to see over time get it, right? So that's actually the harder selection process is who are the teachers. I think that they know 2 different ways, right? One is a really proactive way, which is they look to see who looks like they're having some kind of trouble. And that can be very generic. I've learned over time that it's the student falling asleep in my class that I need to talk to, right? Not assume that they just are too lazy or not interested or whatever, but just go and ask them to come in and see you, right? Or approach them after class. That seems to be the #1 strategy that these folks are taking. And the second is just to spread the news sort of through the networks at their schools that help is available. So it's not usually, and we're watching this happen, this has already started in September, and the teachers are not just serving their own students, right? The people in their classrooms, but through their networks, the students are all starting to talk about the fact that this money is there. The other thing that's so cool, by the way, that I just want to use this opportunity to mention, is that the teachers themselves have taken advantage of this funding to go to their own administrators and say, she put it up, you put it up, right? And so they're using it to get some matching funds. And whenever possible to say, even to the student, like, I'm going to try to use this money as my last resort. Let me see if I can get you some other help, right? This, I got to be clear, on top of a full teaching load and everything else, this is a lot to ask of these folks. We picked seasoned folks. The people who were doing this in the pilot year have been teaching collectively, I think, for about 70 years between the 3 of them, right? They know this stuff, and they've been doing it for a long time. And mainly, I knew they were already going in their own pockets and that there was so much need out there. But over time, that's what the board of these women is going to be doing, is taking nominations for who the next 3 teachers should be next year. And hopefully we'll get enough donations that we'll be able to keep going. But mainly, I just wanted to model the possibility that we could do something else. And also that those of us who work in the field need to do more than just study it.
So nationwide community colleges are really, really focused, I think, increasingly on student success and trying to improve student outcomes. But it sounds like from your presentation that there is a whole lot beyond the pale of what we normally look at in terms of strategies in and out of the classroom to help students succeed. So I wonder, what relationship does your work have to that student success work?
Yeah, well, okay, so it's a great question. I mean, I think, frankly, that what it's doing is it's trying to broaden the sense of what we need, of the sense of the tools that are involved in creating success. I mean, I want to take us back to Maslow, right? If we want students to do well in a complicated, writing assignment or whatever, we need to make sure that they slept the night before, that they've been fed, and that they have a roof over their heads. And we can say that we can't take that on. We can say that's not our job. We can say these are adults. That doesn't make it, it isn't going to get you through the day. The fact is, well, first of all, you are a community college, community. They say it takes a village, then engage the village. There are so many organizations out there that are not currently knit together to help. So does somebody in the student's life know how to call and work that food stamp system? Does somebody there know how to, I've seen things I cannot believe. So I'll give you an example, Miami-Dade College. I know an advisor there who knows that if the student is going to get a bed at a shelter that night, they need to be online by a certain time. So they have somebody who will go stand in line for the student so the student can be in class. So they get a bed that night. Did we ever think that was going to be the job of the advisors? No. Is that a really important job right now? Yeah. We got to go for any tool that we can possibly find to do better. And I think it's very clear. I'm doing more research to try to make it clear, by the way, that like nutrition matters for achievement. It's unfortunate. There doesn't seem to be very much on that for adults. And I don't understand that because we all know that we can't function when we don't eat. And we especially can't function if we haven't eaten for days. So I think we got to just kind of get back to basics here, and maybe, the fancier things are all important, curricular redesign and all of that kind of stuff. I love it all. It's all lovely. But unless their basics are met, it doesn't matter.
Yes. Hi.
Hi.
Thanks for coming.
Sure.
What's your answer to the criticism that free community college won't help any but certain students? In other words, it'll help the wrong students?
Yeah, okay, good, thanks. That's a fun one. Okay, so let me first lay out for people what one of the common critiques is. This is actually critique from the left, which I have found very interesting, okay? And remember, the left has been committed to a very particular strategy for a very long time, which is the progressive thing to do is to make a program that's focused on the people who need the money and make sure all the resources go to them, because the other people are getting all kinds of other goodies, right? So it's a targeted program. In order to target something, like if I wanted to hand out money to only you in the audience who really need it, then I would have to have some kind of way of figuring out who needs it, right? So then they put into this system this whole thing where you do the FAFSA. That's what the FAFSA is. It's a rationing device. It's a gatekeeper. Okay. So first, if we're going to believe that works, we have to believe that the FAFSA actually picks the right people. And I'm telling you it doesn't. Okay. Under free community college, we stop trying to choose who needs money and who doesn't, right? We just make it zero. Now, let's say this side of the room is already getting a Pell Grant, okay? And you're the ones who are currently deemed having financial need and you're getting a Pell Grant. And you are all the ones who make $5,000 too much, or maybe $10,000 too much, maybe $50,000 too much, so you don't get a Pell Grant right now. You're not needy. You're needy, by the way. You have the label? Right. Under free community college, you're not actually going to get a whole lot of additional money, especially if it's designed the way the Oregon Promise is, because you're already getting money. You are going to get more money, okay? And what some people will argue is we shouldn't give you more money because you don't need it. Okay, well, that first falls apart if actually you do need it. It's just the system is drawing the line in the wrong place. The second part that's so important, though, is that process of figuring out who gets what is quite alienating. There are a lot of people out there who could get money for financial aid and go to college, but don't fill out the financial aid application. Not just because the application is hard, it's because the whole process is scary. It's because the whole thing doesn't make any sense. We don't even tell you the price of college until you're already there. Who are you supposed to trust? Who are you supposed to believe in? So the cool thing about saying something is free is that it is really simple. And we don't need to learn this again. By the way, the marketing people all over the country have done this for ages. Free is magic. And free works a certain kind of magic. What happens is that this side of the room, the people who do have financial need and are sitting here in college, it increases. All those seats start to get filled in. Not all of them, but a bunch of them. They're filled now by people who came to college, who would have gotten aid before but weren't coming because they didn't know that they could. And those people, I'm going to suggest that some segment of those people are really talented folks who we were missing out on. And some segment of those folks are just as capable as the rest of you of getting through college. The other thing that I'm counting on in all of this is that by giving all of you something, each of you get a little something, then everybody wants in. and you'll fight to sustain the funding for that program. You'll fight with them instead of looking at the program and saying, why are you getting everything when I'm not getting anything? And that's a political bet. And that's the bet that Mark and others have to actually deal with. But if I'm right, that more seats get filled in on this side, that you actually have need that's not currently being revealed but will be met, and that the whole thing becomes politically sustainable, then that's a progressive policy. But instead of counting the dollars that flow to different people, we should count the effects. And again, that's the flip opposite of how we currently do things. You know, it's really complicated. All higher ed policy is really complicated. And I keep thinking one problem out there about why things aren't getting fixed is just because of how complicated it is to even figure out what the heck's going on in the first place. It's like healthcare. Except it's not like healthcare, so don't think about it like healthcare. Please don't think about the public option like healthcare. Okay, yes.
So I'm curious, when you say free college,
Yes.
are you know, I think most people will interpret that as meaning free tuition, right? And, you know, I work with foster youth.
Yes.
And one thing that we know is that just providing them with money is not enough to get them to graduate with a degree.
Yes.
Right? So, and many students coming from that demographic, it is the cost of attendance that is giving them the money to pay their rent,
Yes.
to live, to get food. And so when you say free college, just taking care of tuition,
Yep.
where's the rest of that money going
Yep.
to come for the
Okay.
cost of attendance?
So let me start with absolutely, you're completely correct. And so if you go back to, okay, let me just redo this. Okay, so there's this way in which we get public policy made in this country, right? And it's a process. It's a really long process. And what you're seeing right now, I believe, with free tuition programs, and in particular the kind of model that Oregon is doing, is an incremental step towards that fully realized model, okay? There has to be a way to get to the model that you just described, and it's a model that I laid out in a paper 2 years ago now. In my version of what I called, at the time, the free 2-year college option, and now I'm calling the first degree for free, which I mean the associate degree, there is no tuition charged. There is subsidized housing available to those who need it, and subsidized food available to those who need it. There's work-study money for everybody. And by the way, work-study pays a living wage. Okay? And yes?
Well, I mean, if you just think about now, what I see consistently, I've worked at many college campuses, is even if work study is there,
Yes.
frequently the college campus can't even supply enough work study positions. So many students end up not accessing that waiver, not because it was underfunded, but because there's no jobs for them to take on the college campus.
So that's just a question of how the college is doing their staffing in order to make that happen. We had that problem at UW-Madison, and we created a ton more positions by going out and letting people know, for example, that they could utilize students to help with teaching and other sorts of things. There's ways to create positions, but I think the most important thing is that we need to lay out the model of what it ought to look like. We need to talk about how it's financially possible, and in my proposal, we can pay for the whole thing tomorrow, including the jobs, including all the things that I just described. We can do that in one simple way. We can do that by stopping the incredible flow of billions of dollars that are currently going to private colleges. Okay? No, I mean, look, I like private colleges, and I don't think, by the way, this is a starter right now. I just want to be clear. The reason I'm saying it is because I want us to think about the choices that we're making. When we say we can't do better than tuition, or we won't do better than tuition, or we won't be able to do a fully realized model, it's just because we haven't thought through all the possible ways of doing it. And until we set up a marker for what we want it to look like, we can't begin to work towards it. This is actually, what you have here is what we would call a version of incremental universalism, right? It's changing the system one bit at a time. You're chipping away. It took 80 years to make high school free in this country. 80 years. We're like 3 years into this. Do we have it right? Do I fervently and completely believe that we've got to do something better than what we have right now, and that we are marching in a direction that is generally the right one, and that we're going to go through a bunch of pain on the way there? Yeah. But I think we can do way better than the tuition. But getting the tuition down is actually a huge step, because the tuition has gotten so high. I mean, net tuition, even with the Pell Grant in this country, is not zero in the vast majority of the country. We're not California for the most part. So I think this is the conversation that I want us to have about what needs to be included, for example, the transportation and things like that. And by the way, there will also be the need for all kinds of other supports for some people. But we also have to remember that there's a whole lot of people out there that don't have multiple other challenges in their life. The challenge is price. And we could get a whole lot more people to the finish line by dealing with that. Yes?
I love everything you're saying. I want to thank you for it. Oh, here we are. The one thing I wanted to just throw out there, and you probably are aware of this, is that at the community college, many of our students are not just straight out of college. And the Oregon Promise right now,
Yes.
which, like you say, it's one step in the right
Yep.
direction, and I appreciate that. But
Yep.
when I see my students, there are so many of them are not straight out of college.
Yes.
They're in their,
Out of high school, yes.
or straight out of high school,
Yes.
thank you.
Yes.
So I'm
Yes.
just throwing that out there.
Oh, no, it's a huge, okay, look, and this is a huge issue. So two things. One is there's a politics to this, right? And we know something about who the public looks kindly upon, right? And young people have some cachet. So if you're going to start somewhere, that seems to be a sympathetic group. These are just, unfortunately, the facts, right? I mean, it's a very harsh reality. But let me tell you something else. In Washington State, that was a major conversation, big concern. And also, they couldn't come up with the same money. And so we came up with a different program. It still hasn't gotten passed, but I think it's a darn good idea. It's called Free to Finish. And it's aimed at the students out there, regardless of their age or how long they've been in or out of school, that have 15 credits or so left, they have no degree. Right? The thing about this is we just need to get creative and figure out different ways to advance this conversation. But the point there is you could offer the same simple message. You can bring all people in, and you can try a different approach to the financing to see what happens. Of course I want those folks in there. There are so many parenting students, and I am so concerned about. I mean, I don't know if you all know that 1 in 4 students in this country, and that's across sectors, 1 in 4 students has a child, and 13% of all students is a single parent. And if we don't understand what this price travesty is doing, not only to those students, but to their children, then we're really missing the boat. So I completely agree with you, but I also am looking at the politics of how we advance this case. Yes?
I have 2 questions. First,
Okay.
what prompted you to write this book and go in depth into this research? And then how do you present this information to government versus to schools?
Okay. The story of why I did it isn't all that fascinating, to be honest with you. I mean, I like to study inequality, and I'm really frustrated, right, with why more people aren't finishing education, and we're making these investments, and I kind of wanted to know more about that. I do have some personal experiences. My grandfather went to college on the GI Bill, the first GI Bill, and has always talked about how that changed our lives. I worked my way through college. I waited tables 40 hours a week, and I took 18 credits a term, and I finished college in 3.5 years. And the only reason I was able to do that was because I went to one of the best high schools in the country, and I already knew how to do college before I even got there, right? So lots of things that I found sort of familiar, and yet lots of things I found completely unfamiliar in this study. The presentation of stories, well, the presentation of this sort of data to different constituencies. I mean, Mark knows and others know. It depends on the audience, right? I mean, I've talked to Republicans, right? And the first thing you got to do, and I hope you will strike up this conversation, by the way, with people who disagree with you. Ask them how they went through college and how they think people should go through college. And let them talk to you about that. And then tell them about your story or somebody else's story that you know, and how people are going through college today. And try to have a meeting of the minds about just where the realities are. I almost always start with student stories. It matters. But by the same token, we need the numbers and the stories. And that part's really hard. There is not a single federal study out there today that measures food insecurity or housing insecurity among undergraduates. So my team and a couple of other researchers out there are pushing really hard to find private funding to try to help us to get this data. The federal government, I am absolutely positive, well, no, depends on the next president. I am very hopeful that in 2020 the federal government will begin doing this, and the reason for the delay is just that that's the cycle in which the survey of undergraduates goes into the field. Okay. In the meantime, we've got stories and we've got some numbers from the colleges that have been willing to let us collect that data, and we'll continue to advance the case. Yeah. I think maybe I have time for like one more or something. I don't know what our stop time is. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi.
I think you're a gem.
Thank you.
Everything you've said is incredibly, like, it just hits really, really deep. And I want to thank you for seeing students as humans and not assuming anything about our lives. I find you so interesting and your work important.
Thank you.
I was asked a question today. What did I want PCC to know about my experience?
Yes.
My answer to that was a lot about transparency. And I wanted to also thank you for seeing the depth of which you've put effort into this. I didn't know that you existed until like a week ago. And I thank God every day since, because everything that I found out about you, it gives me hope that it gives me hope because I know that there are people in higher education who see what I'm seeing and are saying it out loud. Yeah. If there's something that I want PCC to know is that everybody who has a PCC hat, has an official title at a community college, needs to say this out loud on their social medias, and that's exactly what you're doing. Thank you.
Yeah. Wow. There are others. I guess that's one thing I just want to say. You don't do this alone, right? I have a huge crew, and a crew that I unfortunately had to move away from recently because I did say a lot on social media. There are a lot of people out there who know. It is very hard to be out in front of this issue because it threatens a lot of people in power. It makes them feel like they did something wrong. It makes them feel like they're going to have another job or another burden in their lives or whatever else. But there are a lot of people who know, and I'm trying to open the door so you all can get through and show them who you are. And I'm really hoping that more of my colleagues in the field will do it. But it isn't something that our profession rewards, and that also has to change. So thank you very much for your words. I appreciate it. Okay, so I'm going to sign some books out there. You do not feel obligated to purchase things. I also want to tell you that there are books for sale on hard copy. It is also on Kindle for under $10. And I'm telling you that I've donated all the proceeds, my proceeds from this book. I donated them to research on this topic, and everything else is going to the FAST Fund. So if you do buy a book, know that's where it's going. Thank you.
Well, can we give it up one more time for Sara for coming tonight? That concludes tonight's presentation. Thank you for coming. I was supposed to announce what you just heard, but please go out to the book signing is right outside in the corridor. Thank you.